The greatest lies are never told with words. They are lived in silence. For 9 months, the newspapers called Ethan Kong the Broken King of Chicago. Every headline showed the same photograph. The Korean Mafia boss sitting motionless in a custom-built wheelchair, his sharp gray suit perfectly pressed, his expression unreadable beneath the city lights. Rivals whispered that the bullet had stolen his future. Allies lowered their voices whenever they entered his office. Even the men who had followed him for years began to believe that the most feared man in the Midwest would never stand again. Ethan let them believe every word. Every slow turn of his wheelchair, every carefully measured glance, every quiet meeting inside the towering glass headquarters was part of a performance so convincing that even the doctors paid to examine him signed confidential reports confirming his condition. The elevators moved silently through 43 floors of polished marble and smoked glass, while executives adjusted their expectations around a leader who could no longer walk. Yet behind Ethan's calm eyes, every heartbeat measured loyalty instead of time. Every visitor became another name on a list. Every conversation revealed another hidden motive. He had not lost his legs. He was searching for the people who believed he had. The deception cost him comfort, freedom, and almost every relationship he still possessed, but it revealed something power never could. People behaved differently around weakness. Respect faded. Masks slipped. Ambition became visible. The strongest empire could not expose betrayal as efficiently as a man everyone believed was helpless. Then, on an unusually quiet Monday morning, someone new stepped through the frosted glass doors carrying nothing more than a leather notebook, a modest handbag, and remarkable composure. Vanessa Brooks had accepted the position of executive secretary after months of searching for stable work that could cover her mother's growing medical bills. She wasn't impressed by expensive offices or intimidated by famous names. She simply arrived 10 minutes early, greeted the receptionist with a warm smile, and thanked the security guard who held the elevator door. Her natural curls were neatly tied back, and her navy business suit looked carefully maintained rather than fashionable. She blended into the building so completely that most employees barely noticed her passing through the halls. Ethan noticed immediately. Through discreet security monitors hidden behind polished wood panels, he watched the new secretary receive a thick binder filled with company protocols. Every page warned employees never to question the boss, never to enter certain offices without permission, and never to mention his condition unless spoken to directly. Vanessa read every instruction carefully, closed the binder, and quietly asked only one question. What does Mr. Kong prefer for his morning coffee? The human resources manager blinked in surprise before answering. Ethan leaned back ever so slightly in his wheelchair, studying the screen with unexpected curiosity. She hadn't asked about his fortune. She hadn't asked about his reputation. She hadn't asked whether the stories were true. She had asked about coffee. It was the first answer that interested him in months. As the morning sunlight stretched across the polished floor outside his office, Vanessa approached his closed door carrying a fresh notebook and a steaming cup balanced carefully in both hands. She knocked once, waited patiently, and stepped inside without a trace of fear. Ethan lifted his eyes toward her, perfectly still, perfectly convincing, while somewhere deep beneath the silence, one finger twitched almost invisibly against the armrest before becoming motionless again. Vanessa Brooks had learned years ago that the quickest way to understand a workplace was not by reading the employee handbook, but by watching how people treated the quietest person in the room. On her first full day inside Ethan Kang's headquarters, she noticed that every conversation changed the moment his wheelchair appeared. Executives who had been laughing seconds earlier suddenly lowered their voices. Assistants rushed to open doors he had never asked them to touch. Senior managers spoke to him with exaggerated sympathy that sounded rehearsed rather than sincere. Nobody seemed to notice that the expression in Ethan's gray eyes never changed. They believed they were showing kindness, but Vanessa saw something different. They were responding to an image instead of a man. She quietly organized his morning schedule, confirmed appointments, answered calls, and sorted confidential documents with calm precision. Every file returned to the exact place where it belonged. Every meeting began on time. Every visitor received the same respectful greeting whether they arrived wearing a $1,000 suit or a delivery uniform. Shortly before noon, one of the vice presidents entered Ethan's office carrying a stack of contracts. He smiled politely at the boss, but directed every practical question toward Vanessa, as though Ethan could no longer make decisions for himself. Vanessa listened without interrupting until the executive finished speaking. Then she looked at him with steady confidence and said, "Mr. Kong is right here. I believe he would prefer that you address your questions directly to him." The room became noticeably quieter. The executive cleared his throat, turned toward Ethan, and repeated every question. Ethan answered each one with measured confidence before dismissing the meeting only a few minutes later. As the door closed, silence settled across the office once again. Vanessa simply picked up her notebook and continued organizing the afternoon calendar as though nothing unusual had happened. She neither expected praise nor apologized for speaking. Ethan studied her carefully. Most employees tried to anticipate what would please him. Vanessa seemed interested only in what was respectful. Later that afternoon, she noticed that the coffee beside Ethan had gone cold during a long conference call. Without making a comment about his condition, she quietly replaced it with a fresh cup prepared exactly the same way as the first one. "Your coffee," she said with an easy smile. Meetings should not have to compete with cold coffee. Ethan glanced at the steaming mug before lifting his eyes toward her. "Thank you, Ms. Brooks." She nodded once and returned to her desk outside his office. There was no dramatic conversation, no awkward sympathy, and no unnecessary attention. She treated the moment as though she would have done exactly the same thing for anyone else. Throughout the afternoon, Ethan continued watching through the small details that most people ignored. She thanked the custodians before leaving each conference room. She remembered the receptionist's birthday after hearing it only once. She carried heavy supply boxes herself instead of asking someone else to do it. By the time evening sunlight reflected across the Chicago skyline, Ethan found himself replaying a question he had not asked in years. Was genuine kindness still possible in a building where almost every smile came with a hidden purpose? Outside his office, Vanessa closed her notebook, reviewed tomorrow's schedule one final time, and quietly turned off her desk lamp. She had no idea that the man everyone believed needed saving had just begun questioning everything he thought he understood about strength. The first week passed with the quiet rhythm of polished routines, yet Ethan Kong noticed patterns that no security report could measure. Every morning, he deliberately changed something small inside his office before Vanessa arrived. One day, a confidential folder rested on the wrong shelf. The next day, an important contract disappeared beneath a stack of financial reports. Another morning, his favorite fountain pen rolled beneath the conference table, just beyond the comfortable reach of someone confined to a wheelchair. None of these moments were accidents. They were silent examinations designed to expose impatience, curiosity, or ambition. Most people believed that power revealed character. Ethan had discovered that inconvenience revealed far more. Vanessa never searched through documents that were not assigned to her. She simply returned every misplaced item to its proper location without lingering over private information. When she found the fountain pen beneath the table, she picked it up, placed it gently beside his notebook, and continued reviewing his schedule without mentioning it. She never acted impressed by confidential files or expensive possessions. Instead, she focused on details that made the office function more smoothly. She adjusted the window shades before afternoon sunlight reached his eyes. She noticed that long meetings left unopened bottles of water on the conference table and quietly replaced them with fresh ones before the next visitors arrived. She memorized the preferences of every executive assistant, so meetings began without unnecessary interruptions. More importantly, she never filled silence simply because it made other people uncomfortable. One rainy afternoon, the headquarters lost power for less than 30 seconds before the backup generators restored every floor. Employees immediately began whispering through the hallways, worried about delayed presentations and missed calls. Vanessa calmly retrieved printed copies of the afternoon agenda from a cabinet that nobody else remembered existed. While everyone else searched for explanations, she handed each department exactly what they needed to continue working. Ethan watched the entire scene through the glass wall of his office. She solved problems without announcing herself as the hero. Later that day, he created another test. As they reviewed correspondence, he deliberately allowed a leather portfolio to slip from his lap onto the polished hardwood floor. Several confidential papers scattered across the room. Vanessa immediately gathered every page. carefully keeping them face down so she would not accidentally read their contents. When she finished, she placed the portfolio back on his desk and smiled politely. "Everything is exactly as it was, Mr. Calm." Ethan studied her for several quiet seconds. "You never looked." Vanessa tilted her head slightly, almost puzzled by the question. "They were not mine to read." Her answer contained neither pride nor hesitation. It sounded as natural as saying good morning. For the first time in many months, Ethan felt something unfamiliar disturb the carefully controlled silence surrounding his thoughts. Countless people had claimed loyalty while secretly chasing influence. Vanessa asked for neither recognition nor reward. She respected boundaries that nobody had asked her to honor. As evening settled over the Chicago skyline and office lights reflected across the rain-covered windows, Ethan realized his carefully planned investigation had produced an unexpected complication. The woman he intended to evaluate was quietly becoming the one person whose honesty he could no longer predict. And for a man who had built his life on reading everyone around him, that uncertainty felt far more dangerous than any deception. The following Monday began with an unexpected change that nobody else noticed. Ethan arrived earlier than usual and dismissed every assistant except Vanessa before the first meeting. A thick schedule filled with negotiations, financial reviews, and private consultations rested neatly on his desk, but he quietly slid one envelope beneath a legal folder where it could not easily be seen. The envelope contained a charitable donation request from a neighborhood youth center that had partnered with his company years earlier. Every previous assistant had either overlooked it or quietly placed it at the bottom of the day's priorities because it generated no profit. Ethan wanted to see what Vanessa would do. She entered the office carrying the morning reports and greeted him with the same calm smile she wore every day. Without rushing, she organized the paperwork into careful stacks, answered 2 phone calls, confirmed an afternoon conference, and finally noticed the partially hidden envelope. Instead of opening it, she checked the handwritten note on the front, saw that it required his signature before noon, and placed it gently on top of the remaining documents. "This appears to have been separated from the rest," she said. "It looks important." Ethan glanced toward the envelope without changing his expression. Most people would not think so. Vanessa simply smiled. Important does not always mean profitable. Her answer lingered in the room long after she returned to her desk. Throughout the afternoon, Ethan quietly created more opportunities to observe her. He intentionally approved overlapping appointments to see whether she would become frustrated. She calmly reorganized the schedule without blaming anyone. He instructed the kitchen to prepare lunch only for him, knowing several employees working late would miss their break. Vanessa quietly ordered additional meals with her own company allowance so no one worked hungry. When one of the maintenance employees accidentally dropped a box of office supplies across the hallway, several executives walked past without slowing down. Vanessa knelt beside him, gathered every scattered folder, and wished him a good afternoon before continuing toward the elevator as though the moment required no recognition. Ethan watched everything through the office windows that overlooked the main corridor. She never paused to see who was watching. That detail unsettled him more than anything else. Near sunset, a heavy rainstorm settled over downtown Chicago, turning the skyline into a blur of silver glass and gray clouds. Employees hurried toward the parking garage carrying umbrellas and briefcases, while Vanessa remained behind to organize the next morning's agenda. As she prepared to leave, she noticed an elderly janitor quietly struggling to move a supply cart over the thick entrance rug. Without hesitation, she placed her handbag on a nearby chair and helped guide the cart through the doorway before thanking him for keeping the building clean every day. The man smiled with quiet surprise because very few people knew his name. Ethan remained alone inside his office after everyone else had gone home. The city lights reflected across the windows while silence settled through the nearly empty building. For months he had believed that every act of kindness carried a hidden price. Yet Vanessa continued offering respect where no advantage existed, speaking with the same warmth to executives, receptionists, custodians, and strangers alike. Sitting perfectly still behind his polished desk, Ethan found himself confronting a question that no investigation had prepared him to answer. If someone could see dignity in every person they met, what might they eventually see in a man who had spent months hiding behind a carefully constructed lie? Several days later, A quiet discovery changed the direction of Ethan's carefully controlled investigation. It did not come from surveillance cameras, financial reports, or the background checks his security team routinely prepared. It came from a simple conversation he happened to overhear as Vanessa stood outside his office speaking softly on her lunch break. Her voice carried the steady patience that had become familiar throughout the building. "Do not worry, Mama," she said. "I will be there after work. Make sure Marcus remembers his therapy exercises. I know today is difficult, but we will get through it together." When the call ended, she slipped her phone into her purse, took a slow breath, and returned to her desk wearing the same calm expression she showed everyone else. There was no complaint, no request for sympathy, and no sign that the conversation had revealed anything extraordinary. Yet something about the name Marcus remained in Ethan's thoughts. That evening, after the office had emptied and the city lights shimmered across Lake Michigan, he quietly asked his chief of security for the employment file they had compiled before hiring Vanessa. The report confirmed everything she had listed on her application, but one section contained details she had never mentioned aloud. Years earlier, while attending law school with excellent grades, Vanessa had withdrawn during her final year. Her younger brother, Marcus Brooks, had suffered a life-changing spinal injury after a serious automobile accident. Overnight, her plans for a legal career disappeared. She accepted multiple administrative jobs, cared for her brother through years of rehabilitation, and helped her mother keep their family together without accepting charity from anyone. Ethan slowly closed the file, realizing why Vanessa had never treated him with exaggerated pity. She had spent years learning that dignity could survive even when circumstances changed. The following afternoon provided another unexpected answer. During a lengthy strategy meeting, Ethan reached for a document at the edge of his desk and deliberately paused before asking, "Ms. Brooks, would you hand me the blue folder?" Vanessa quietly placed it in front of him, but before returning to her chair, she adjusted the position of the folder by less than an inch so it rested comfortably within easy reach. The movement was almost invisible. She did not ask whether he needed help. She simply removed a small inconvenience without drawing attention to it. Ethan looked up. "You always notice details." Vanessa smiled gently. When someone spends enough time caring for another person, they learn to notice the things that make a day easier. Most people think help has to be dramatic. Usually it is something much smaller. Ethan held her gaze for a brief moment before lowering his eyes to the folder. She had unknowingly described her own life. From that day forward, he began seeing dozens of quiet gestures that everyone else overlooked. She positioned chairs so conversations felt natural. She adjusted meeting schedules to reduce unnecessary stress. She remembered birthdays, family illnesses, and personal milestones without ever making them feel like obligations. Her kindness was never loud enough to attract applause, yet it quietly transformed every room she entered. Sitting alone after another long day, Ethan realized the greatest secret Vanessa carried was not hidden inside her past. It was the extraordinary ability to protect another person's dignity so naturally that they often never realized they had been cared for at all. And for the first time since beginning his elaborate deception, he wondered whether she had already begun seeing through the carefully constructed mask he believed no one could penetrate. The storm arrived just after 4 o'clock, wrapping downtown Chicago in sheets of cold rain that blurred the skyline into silver shadows. Most employees hurried through the final meetings of the afternoon, eager to reach home before traffic became impossible. Inside Ethan's headquarters, however, an unusual tension settled across the executive floor. Several scheduled visitors had arrived unexpectedly. Security officers exchanged quiet glances through their communication devices, and conversations that normally flowed with practiced confidence became noticeably shorter. Ethan noticed every subtle change without allowing his expression to reveal it. His investigation had taught him to recognize the smallest shifts in routine. Vanessa sensed the atmosphere as well, although she could not explain why. She simply continued moving through the office with her usual composure, delivering documents, confirming appointments, and quietly reminding everyone that patience solved more problems than panic. As the final meeting of the day ended, a sudden mechanical alarm echoed through the building. The emergency lighting briefly illuminated the hallway before the normal lights returned seconds later. Employees stopped speaking. Some reached instinctively for their phones while others looked toward the security team for answers. Ethan's chief of security stepped into the office, his face calm, but unusually serious. "We need to move everyone away from this floor for a routine security inspection," he said. His words sounded professional, but Ethan immediately recognized the coded message hidden beneath them. Something had disrupted the carefully controlled operation surrounding his investigation. Vanessa gathered the remaining files without asking unnecessary questions. She opened the office door and politely guided several visitors toward the elevators, reassuring them that the delay would only be temporary. Her voice remained steady enough that even anxious executives relaxed as they followed her instructions. When she returned to Ethan's office, she noticed that the hallway outside had become strangely empty. "The others are on their way downstairs," she said softly. "Would you like me to stay until your security team returns?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment before answering. Yes. It was the shortest reply he had given her all week. Minutes passed in complete silence except for the steady rhythm of rain striking the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then another urgent message reached Ethan's secure phone. He read only a single line before quietly setting the device aside. Whatever had happened required immediate action beyond the office. Time, which he had controlled for months, had suddenly become his enemy. Vanessa noticed something else. His breathing had changed almost imperceptibly, not with fear, but with decision. Without thinking, she moved closer and lowered her voice. "Whatever is happening, you do not have to carry it alone." Ethan lifted his eyes toward her. For the first time since she had entered his life, he saw no trace of curiosity, suspicion, or expectation in her expression. There was only sincere concern for another human being. At that exact moment, another urgent signal sounded from the security system, followed by hurried footsteps approaching from the far end of the hallway. Ethan understood that the carefully constructed illusion protecting his investigation could not survive the next few seconds. Slowly, with deliberate control, he placed both hands on the armrests of his wheelchair. Vanessa watched in complete silence as he rose smoothly to his feet without hesitation. The room seemed to stop breathing. Outside the office, two security officers reached the doorway just as Ethan took his first steady step across the polished hardwood floor. Neither officer spoke. Their expressions revealed absolute disbelief. Vanessa remained exactly where she stood, her eyes fixed on Ethan. There was no anger, no shock, and no accusation in her face. Only a quiet sadness that seemed deeper than surprise itself. Ethan realized then that revealing the truth had not been the hardest part. The hardest part was seeing disappointment reflected in the eyes of the one person whose respect had become more valuable than the success of his carefully planned deception. Silence lingered long after the security officers escorted the remaining visitors away from the executive floor. The rain continued tapping against the towering windows, but inside Ethan's office every sound seemed distant, as though the city itself had stepped back to witness the truth that could no longer be hidden. Ethan remained standing beside the wheelchair that had defined his life for nearly a year. It no longer looked like a symbol of weakness. It looked like evidence. Vanessa slowly closed the notebook she had been carrying and placed it carefully on his desk. Her movements remained calm, almost gentle, yet the warmth that had always filled her expression had quietly disappeared. Ethan took a single step toward her before stopping. For the first time in many years, he found himself searching for words that refused to come. He had negotiated impossible agreements, rebuilt empires from failure, and persuaded countless people to trust him. Yet standing before one honest woman suddenly felt more difficult than every victory he had ever claimed. Finally he spoke. "I can explain." Vanessa looked at him with steady eyes that revealed neither anger nor fear. "I believe you can," she answered softly. "But I am not sure the explanation is what matters most." Her voice carried no accusation. That made the words even heavier. Ethan lowered his gaze for a brief moment. "You think I lied to you?" Vanessa gave a small nod. "No, I think you lied to everyone. I just happened to be standing close enough to see it end." Another quiet silence settled between them. Outside the office, employees continued moving through the building unaware that everything had changed inside the room. Ethan rested one hand on the back of the wheelchair. "There were reasons." Vanessa smiled sadly. "I never doubted that." She walked toward the large window overlooking Chicago, watching streams of headlights reflect across the rain-soaked streets below. My brother spent years learning how to stand again after his accident. Every single step was earned. Every inch of progress mattered because it was real. Watching someone pretend to carry that burden. She paused, taking a slow breath before continuing. It hurts more than you probably realize. Ethan felt those words settle deeper than any criticism he had ever received. He had expected outrage, disbelief, or demands for answers. Instead, she had given him perspective. She was not offended because he had fooled her. She was saddened because she understood what genuine struggle looked like. After another long silence, Vanessa turned back toward him. "There is something you should know." Ethan met her eyes. "I realized weeks ago." His expression changed instantly. "What do you mean?" "Small things never match the story everyone believed. The muscle tone in your shoulders. The way your balance shifted when you reached for a file. The tiny movement in your hand the day I first walked into this office. None of it fit." Ethan stared at her in complete disbelief. "Then why did you never say anything?" Vanessa answered without hesitation. "Because exposing your secret was never as important as understanding why you needed it." The room fell completely still. Ethan suddenly realized that while he had spent months studying every person around him, someone else had quietly been studying him with the same careful attention. She had seen through the performance long before anyone else. Yet she had protected his dignity instead of exposing him. As Vanessa picked up her handbag, she offered him one final look filled with compassion rather than resentment. "You wanted to discover who would remain honest when they believed you were powerless," she said gently. "I only wanted to know whether the man behind the performance still remembered who he was." With those words, she walked toward the office door, leaving Ethan standing alone beside the empty wheelchair. Finally understanding that the only person he had never managed to deceive was the one person he could no longer bear to lose. The office felt unfamiliar the next morning. Not because the furniture had changed or because the skyline beyond the glass walls looked any different, but because the silence carried a weight Ethan had never experienced before. The desk outside his office remained perfectly organized, yet Vanessa's chair was empty. Her neatly labeled folders had been placed in careful stacks. Every appointment had been updated for the week ahead, and a handwritten note rested on top of the final schedule. It contained only one sentence. "Everything you need has been prepared." There was no farewell, no complaint, and no request for recognition. She had completed every responsibility before quietly stepping away. Ethan stood motionless beside the window for several minutes, holding the note more carefully than documents worth millions of dollars. His chief of security entered the office and offered a routine update about completed investigations, resolved internal concerns, and loyal associates who had finally revealed themselves during the months of deception. Normally, those results would have satisfied Ethan. Instead, he listened without hearing a single detail. When the report ended, he asked only one question. "Did Ms. Brooks say where she was going?" The answer came with a respectful shake of the head. She had simply thanked everyone for the opportunity and left the building before sunrise. That afternoon, Ethan did something none of his senior executives expected. He canceled every remaining meeting and drove alone across the city without the long convoy that usually followed him. His destination was not another office or private club. It was a modest rehabilitation center on the south side, where Vanessa visited her younger brother after work. Ethan remained outside until he saw her emerge carrying a small paper bag and laughing softly as Marcus waved goodbye through the entrance window. The smile on her face disappeared only after she noticed Ethan waiting beside his car. Neither of them spoke immediately. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of rain as families walked through the nearby park, completely unaware that one of the city's most influential men stood uncertain about his next sentence. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I spent months pretending to lose something because I believed it was the only way to discover the truth about the people around me." Vanessa listened quietly. "But somewhere along the way," he continued, "I realized I had hidden behind that lie for so long that I stopped recognizing myself." His voice remained calm, yet every word sounded lighter than the ones before it, as though honesty required less effort than deception. Vanessa looked toward the rehabilitation center before meeting his eyes again. "Truth does not erase the past," she said gently. "It only gives the future a chance to become different." Ethan nodded slowly. "I am not asking you to forget what happened." He paused before continuing. I am asking for the opportunity to become the man you believed still existed." Vanessa studied him with the same quiet attention she had shown from the beginning. She saw no performance in his posture, no carefully rehearsed confidence, and no desire to impress. The powerful figure who had once measured every conversation like a negotiation now stood with unexpected humility, willing to accept whatever answer she chose to give. For the first time since they had met, Ethan understood that earning trust could never be accomplished through influence, wealth, or carefully designed plans. It could only begin the moment a person stopped hiding behind the mask that had protected them for far too long. 3 weeks later, the entire executive team gathered in the grand conference hall for what everyone expected to be another strategic announcement. The marble floors reflected the morning sunlight. Conversations drifted through the room in cautious whispers, and every eye turned toward the entrance when Ethan Kong appeared. For the first time in nearly a year, there was no wheelchair waiting beside the conference table. Ethan walked into the room at an unhurried pace, each step steady, each movement honest. The silence that followed felt deeper than applause. Some faces revealed surprise, others relief, but none carried the certainty they once possessed. Ethan stopped before the long table and looked at the people who had worked beside him through both truth and deception. "Today," he said calmly, "I am ending the performance that should never have lasted this long." No elaborate explanation followed. No attempt to justify every decision. He accepted responsibility without asking anyone to excuse it. He spoke about trust, about fear, and about how power had convinced him that testing people was safer than believing in them. Then he surprised everyone once more. He announced a new leadership structure that rewarded integrity, expanded charitable partnerships throughout Chicago, and created educational scholarships for families facing unexpected medical hardships. Those who had only measured success through numbers struggled to understand the change. Those who understood character recognized something far more valuable. After the meeting ended, employees slowly returned to their offices carrying conversations unlike any the building had heard before. Respect no longer came from the image of an untouchable leader. It came from watching someone choose honesty when continuing the lie would have been easier. Later that afternoon, Ethan visited the neighborhood rehabilitation center again. This time he did not arrive with prepared speeches or carefully chosen words. He simply carried several boxes of office supplies, new computers that had been requested months earlier, and a personal donation made without his company logo attached. Inside the center, Marcus welcomed him with a warm smile, and the two spent nearly an hour talking about adaptive technology, basketball, and future career plans. When Vanessa entered the activity room after finishing a volunteer session, she paused quietly at the doorway. Ethan was not standing at the center of attention. He was listening, really listening. Marcus laughed at one of Ethan's stories, and Ethan laughed with him, not as a powerful businessman or a feared leader, but as another person enjoying an ordinary afternoon. Vanessa walked over and smiled softly. "He likes you," she said. Ethan glanced toward Marcus before answering. "I think I needed this conversation more than he did." Vanessa nodded with gentle understanding. Sometimes the strongest step forward is not proving that you can walk. It is choosing where you walk next. Ethan looked out the window where children played beneath the warm afternoon sun. Months earlier, he had believed that pretending to lose his legs would reveal the truth about everyone around him. Instead, the greatest truth had arrived quietly through a woman who never sought recognition, never demanded gratitude, and never stopped treating every person with equal dignity. He turned toward Vanessa with genuine peace reflected in his eyes. She returned the smile that had first caught his attention on her very first day, and this time neither of them needed another explanation. The future would not be built on deception or fear, but on trust earned one honest choice at a time. And on that quiet afternoon, the city did not remember the man who pretended he could not walk. It remembered the man who finally learned how to move forward with humility, because one compassionate woman had reminded him that true strength has never been measured by power, but by the courage to protect the dignity of others.